Carswell, who joins us live from his home in the United States. Douglas, is this punishment for Brexit?
Boris is certainly being treated much more harshly than I think he otherwise would have been. There's a certain kind of journalist, a certain kind of backbench MP, there's a certain kind of pundit who will never forgive Boris Johnson for actually making Brexit happen. But I think we need to be clear about this. Actually, I think Boris is largely the architect of his own misfortune. Had he not got it so spectacularly wrong on lockdowns and his reaction to COVID, had he done what we're told was his instinct at the outset, which is to take the Swedish approach, to offer people advice, to allow people, whether it's Dominic Cummings or Boris Johnson or Joe Public, to decide how best to manage the risks associated with the virus. Had he taken that essentially English approach rather than the dirigist, regulatory, top-down, draconian Chinese Communist Party approach, had he done that, he would still, I think, be in office today. So much of what has derailed his government, whether it's the departure of Dominic Cummings or this latest bust-up, basically boils down to him getting a fundamental wrong decision on lockdowns. And I'm afraid I think that is the albatross around his neck, and it's the albatross around the neck of the Conservative Party. This is the party that gave us Chinese-style lockdowns, and I think that is the root cause of this country's problems. It's also not just the Tory party's problems, it's the root cause of Britain's dire economic problems, actually. So I think that fatal misjudgment over COVID explains why he is out of politics.
Well, I tend to agree with you. It's not just Sweden, is it? If you compare states in America where you live, Florida had a very light touch approach to the pandemic. After about a year, they lifted most restrictions, whereas California was pretty much a police state for the best part of 3 years. And we didn't see better outcomes in California or New York. I've got this amazing email. I've got so many fantastic viewers and listeners, as you know, Douglas. And I've got this from Richard, who says the nasty party, the Tories, has finally removed the last hurdle that could have stopped the great Brexit reversal. The salty Remainers now have a free run back to the EU. That's the view of Richard. What's your view?
I'm afraid I disagree. I'm not that much of a pessimist. I think Brexit is largely done. It would be very, very difficult to undo it for a very simple reason. What is it that the UK would be rejoining? The EU that we left doesn't exist anymore. It is now pretty clear that the European Union is reverting to a Habsburg tradition. It is basically, as Barroso once described it, an imperial project. And I think if we were to ever rejoin, we would need to give up our currency. We would need to surrender to a whole body of acquis communautaire. The idea that you could get the approval of the British public for that, I think, is for the birds. Clearly, there's been a failure by this government to take full advantage of the opportunities of Brexit. But I think as every month, every year goes by, the chances of us rejoining diminish. It becomes progressively harder and harder to do. Now, clearly what's happened is with Brexit, Britain recovered the power of self-government. We now need to discover people with the competence and the character capable of actually governing us. And I'm afraid we're a long way from achieving that.
Douglas, are there parallels between the treatment of Boris Johnson in the UK and former President Donald Trump in America?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of similarities. I mean, for a start, both of them have been driven out or attempts have been made to drive them out using sort of anti-democratic, legalistic means. We saw Bernard Jenkins' kangaroo court, and yes, Bernard, I think it is a kangaroo court. Bernard Jenkins' kangaroo court used to try to drive Boris out. We've seen various legal attempts made to try to thwart Donald Trump's second attempt at the US presidency. Both of them also have another thing in common. They generate a kind of completely irrational and disproportionate vitriol from their opponents. People who go mad at the very thought of Donald Trump in America, they have cousins across the water in the UK who Boris seems to drive quite mad. They've also got something else in common. Neither of them has actually been that effective in office, despite all the vitriol that they draw from their opponents. Neither Trump nor Boris actually really delivered the kind of things that was once expected of them by their supporters and feared by their detractors. So I think both of them have generated much heat, but little light, and precious little achievement. There's a great sense of what could have been in both cases. But, conservatism ultimately isn't defined by its strong men or strong women. It's defined by ideas. And I think we will gradually see both the conservative movement on your side of the Atlantic and on mine begin to find other people who can perhaps fight and win in a way that neither Boris nor Trump managed to.
Douglas, we always love having you on the show. Catch up soon. My thanks there to former Conservative and UKIP MP Douglas Carswell, the co-founder of Vote Leave.